Imagine you wake up one morning to a knock at your door. It isn't the police. It isn't a court summons. It isn't a debt collector. It's officers from the country's most powerful anti-corruption agency. And within hours, you are sitting in a bare interrogation room, cut off from your lawyers, cut off from your family, cut off from the outside world entirely, while officers take turns circling you, raising their voices, banging their fists on the table, and demanding that you sign documents you are barely given time to read. No clear charges, no transparent process, just pressure. Raw, deliberate, suffocating pressure. And somewhere outside that room, sources tell us, a group of businessmen are waiting for you to break, waiting for you to hand over your company shares at a fraction of their true value, waiting for the call that says the job is done. This is not a scene from a political thriller. This is what multiple executives in Malaysia say happened to them. Carried out not by criminals operating in the shadows, but allegedly by officers of the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, the very agency that was created to be the nation's shield against exactly this kind of abuse. Welcome to HEMS Reports. I'm Mike. Today, we go inside one of the most deeply troubling investigative stories to emerge from Southeast Asia in recent years. A story about an agency built to fight corruption that has itself been accused of becoming a tool for it. A story about powerful businessmen allegedly operating in the shadows of law enforcement. About a chief commissioner surrounded by controversy, kept in office despite mounting questions. And about a prime minister who rode to power on a wave of anti-corruption promises, and who is now being asked why the man at the center of these allegations is still sitting at the top of Malaysia's most powerful law enforcement body. This is the story of the MACC, and it goes all the way to the top. To understand why this story is so significant, you first have to understand what the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission actually is, and just how much power it holds. Malaysia is a country of remarkable contrasts. It is a vibrant, diverse nation, home to extraordinary food, a rich mix of cultures and traditions, a dynamic economy, and a population of over 33 million people spread across the Malay Peninsula and the island of Borneo. Kuala Lumpur is one of Southeast Asia's most dynamic cities. The country has positioned itself for decades as a regional economic powerhouse, attracting foreign investment and building world-class infrastructure. But Malaysia also carries another reputation, one that its government has spent years trying to shed. It is a country with a long and painful history of high-profile corruption scandals. A country where the line between political power and economic privilege has time and again blurred in ways that have cost ordinary citizens dearly. Into that context, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission was established, an agency designed to be different, designed to be independent, designed to be the institution that could look any powerful person in the eye and say, the law applies to you too. And the MACC is not toothless. Far from it. This agency has sweeping authority that puts it in a category well beyond ordinary law enforcement. It can arrest individuals without going through the standard police process. It can freeze bank accounts. It can seize assets. It can compel testimony. It operates with a speed and directness that few other institutions in Malaysia can match. Its headquarters sits prominently in Putrajaya, Malaysia's purpose-built administrative capital, a city of grand architecture and carefully designed government symbolism. Drive through Putrajaya, and you'll pass the Prime Minister's office, the stunning Central Mosque, and right there on the skyline, unmistakable and imposing, the MACC headquarters. A building that was meant to be a statement, a declaration of the government's seriousness about cleaning up the country's institutions. But as we began digging into this story, traveling to Malaysia on multiple reporting trips, speaking with dozens of sources across the business community, the legal profession, and inside the MACC itself, and going through thousands of pages of internal documents, a very different picture began to emerge. a picture of an agency whose extraordinary powers may, in certain cases, have been turned not against corruption, but toward it. To understand how the MACC arrived at this moment, you have to go back to the scandal that changed Malaysia's political landscape forever. The One Malaysia Development Berhad Fund, known around the world simply as 1MDB, was supposed to be a sovereign wealth vehicle, a state-owned investment fund designed to drive economic development, attract capital, and generate returns for the Malaysian people. What it became was something else entirely. What investigators across multiple countries ultimately uncovered was one of the largest financial frauds in recorded history. Approximately $4.5 billion was systematically looted from the fund over several years. The money flowed through a labyrinth of shell companies, offshore accounts, and financial intermediaries spanning multiple continents. It funded a Hollywood film. It paid for super yachts. It financed luxury real estate purchases in New York, Beverly Hills, and London. It paid for jewelry, artwork, and a lifestyle of almost incomprehensible extravagance. And at the center of it all, according to investigators from the United States, Switzerland, Singapore, and Malaysia, was Najib Razak, the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Approximately $681 million from the fund ended up deposited directly into Najib's personal bank accounts. When this fact became public knowledge, the scandal detonated across Malaysian society. Najib's government responded with an explanation that strained credibility to its breaking point. The money, his officials insisted, was a personal donation from the Saudi royal family. Malaysia's Attorney General went on record to confirm this position, that the $681 million was a gift to the sitting Prime Minister from a foreign royal house. The explanation was greeted with widespread disbelief, and here is where the MACC enters the picture in a deeply uncomfortable way. When investigators began looking into Najib and the 1MDB scandal, the MACC initially started an inquiry. But that inquiry went nowhere. Under Najib's government, the investigation quietly stalled. The agency that was supposed to be Malaysia's anti-corruption watchdog found a way to look away from the biggest corruption scandal the country had ever seen. It was only after Najib was voted out of power in the historic 2018 general election that the full weight of the law began to fall on him. The new government ordered the MACC to reopen investigations. Najib was subsequently charged, tried, convicted, and sentenced to prison, a sentence he is currently appealing. But the 1MDB episode revealed something profoundly important about the MACC that set the stage for everything that followed. Despite its formal independence, the agency's behavior had been shaped, some would say controlled, by political winds blowing from the very office it was meant to hold accountable. The Prime Minister, in practice, picks the MACC's Chief Commissioner. The Commission technically reports upward to the Prime Minister's office. And when the person sitting in that office is the subject of the investigation, the structural conflict of interest becomes impossible to ignore. After the political earthquake of 2018, and through a turbulent period of shifting governments and prime ministers that followed, Malaysia eventually arrived at the elections of 2022. And with them, a figure who had spent decades as one of the most recognizable symbols of political reform in Southeast Asia, Anwar Ibrahim. His story is extraordinary. A former deputy prime minister who had been imprisoned twice, once in 1998 and again in 2004, on charges that he and his supporters maintained were politically motivated. A man who had spent years in opposition, building a coalition around the idea that Malaysia could be governed differently, governed honestly. In November 2022, after one of the most contested elections in the country's history, Anwar was appointed Prime Minister by the Malaysian king. And he came in with a mandate that was, at its core, about one thing above all others: cleaning up the system. His coalition had made anti-corruption reform a central pillar of their campaign. Malaysians who voted for Anwar did so, in significant part, because they believed he would finally bring genuine accountability to institutions that had spent years operating in a culture of impunity. One of the early and tangible expressions of this ambition was the appointment of Latifa Koya as MACC Chief Commissioner. Latifa was a lawyer with 22 years of practice behind her. She was an outsider, not a career official who had worked her way through the MACC's internal hierarchy, but someone brought in specifically to represent a break from the institution's past. The symbolism was significant. For the first time, the head of the MACC was someone who had not been shaped by decades of institutional culture, internal politics, and the silent understandings that develop over long careers in any bureaucracy. She was, by her own account, viewed with suspicion from the moment she walked through the door. Outsiders are a trouble, basically, she reflected later. The culture she inherited was one where genuine independence came at a cost, where officers who didn't fall into line with expectations risked being passed over for promotion, losing positions, or being marginalized within the organization. Everything is about, "Did I step on the wrong toes?" she said. The learning curve was steep, the resistance was real, and her tenure lasted just 9 months. In July 2020, Latifa Koya resigned as MACC Chief Commissioner. She maintained publicly that the decision was entirely her own and denied any suggestion that external pressure had pushed her out. But her departure closed a window that many had hoped would remain open far longer. "I thought it's best to go back to my old life," she said simply. And with her departure, the baton passed to a man who represented something very different from what she had embodied. If Latifa Koya was a deliberate departure from convention, Azam Baki was its complete reversal. Azam Baki is, in every sense, an institution man. He joined the MACC, then operating under its predecessor structure, in 1984. He has spent more than 4 decades inside the organization. He climbed the internal hierarchy methodically and patiently, rising to the position of Deputy Chief Commissioner before Latifa's resignation opened the path to the very top. When Azam was appointed Chief Commissioner, it was, as observers noted, a return to the established order of things. A departure from the brief experiment with outside reform, a signal that the institution would be led, once again, from within. Those who know Azam Baki describe him in terms that paint a picture of a complex figure: smooth, charismatic, someone with a natural talent for building relationships, navigating political environments, and striking deals. A man, by multiple accounts, who genuinely loves the agency he has spent his career serving, and who loves the authority that comes with leading it. But there is a perspective, offered by those who have watched his trajectory closely, that gives pause. The observation that a person who is given significant power and responsibility becomes dangerous when their attachment to that power becomes too strong. When holding on to the position matters more than the principles the position is meant to serve. The person that you give responsibility or power cannot hold on or love the position too much, one source told us. That's the beginning of a problem. Under Azam Baki's leadership, the MACC continued to conduct high-profile operations, raids, arrests, seizures. The machinery of enforcement kept moving. But as we conducted our investigation, as we spoke to business executives, legal professionals, academic researchers, and current and former MACC insiders, a pattern began to emerge that was profoundly disturbing. A pattern that suggested the agency's formidable powers were, in certain cases, being turned not against corruption, but in service of it. The term corporate mafia first appeared in a Malay-language blog, written to describe what the author alleged was a coordinated network of businessmen operating in Malaysia's corporate sector. The characterization was inflammatory, and it's important to be precise about what the evidence actually shows. This is not a mafia in the traditional, structured, hierarchical sense of the word. There is no formal organization chart. There is no sworn loyalty or formal initiation. What has been alleged, across multiple sources, legal filings, and insider accounts, is something more fluid but no less troubling. A loose network of individuals who, it is claimed, have learned how to leverage connections with enforcement authorities to advance their own commercial interests. And at the center of these allegations is a name, Victor Chin. Victor Chin has been investigated by multiple Malaysian agencies, including for tax evasion, share manipulation, and money laundering. To this date, he has not been charged in any court in connection with these investigations. But he has been named in civil lawsuits and described by executives of listed companies as a central figure in alleged efforts to forcibly dislodge company founders from their own businesses. Sources inside and outside the MACC describe Chin as preferring to operate through associates rather than directly, and one associate whose name came up repeatedly in our reporting is a man named Andy Lim. Multiple sources, individuals with direct knowledge of Maxi's internal workings, told us that Andy Lim maintained a close personal relationship with Chief Commissioner Azam Baki. This was not a rumor circulating on the fringes of corporate gossip. It was, according to an internal MACC memorandum that we obtained, written around 2020 by officers in the agency's own intelligence division, something that was well known within the organization itself. The memo was explicit. Azam Baki and Andy Lim were close friends. And this closeness was not a secret among MACC personnel. The alleged operational playbook, as described by multiple sources and reflected in legal documents we reviewed, follows a remarkably consistent pattern. It begins with the appearance of one or more individuals connected to this network at a Malaysian publicly listed company. Shortly after their arrival on the scene, the MACC announces that it is opening an investigation into one of the company's founders or senior executives. That executive is brought in for questioning. They are detained by MACC officers. And then, according to multiple accounts, comes the proposition. Sell your shares at a significant discount to a buyer connected to the network, and the investigation ends. Your problem goes away. Keep fighting, and the process continues indefinitely. One source told us that the fee for this kind of service, running through what insiders described as Section D of the MACC's Investigations Division, the unit specifically tasked with monitoring listed companies and financial markets, could run into the millions of ringgit, hundreds of thousands of US dollars. Section D offered a range of services, one MACC official told us. This included intimidation. It could escalate to raids and arrests. And the ultimate tool was to get people charged in court. These are extraordinary allegations. They describe not just individual misconduct but a structured arrangement, allegedly known to senior officials, up to and including the Chief Commissioner himself, through which the legal machinery of a national anti-corruption agency was turned into a commercial product, available to those with the money and the connections to purchase it. Statistics and documents can describe a pattern. But to understand what this allegedly looks like from the inside, from the perspective of the person sitting in that interrogation room, you need to hear from the people who say they lived it. We spoke to a senior manager at a Malaysian-listed company, a man we are calling Adam to protect his identity. Adam described the day MACC officers arrived at his company's offices. They came on the basis of a complaint, they said, related to certain transactions. But from the beginning, he said, something felt wrong. They were whispering and sending messages to someone else. They were very suspicious in their behavior. He was asked to come to MACC headquarters. He was placed in a room. Officers began filing in. They took turns questioning him, rotating in and out, asking questions that had no clear direction or coherent line of inquiry. The session stretched from morning to evening. No resolution. No clarity about what they were actually looking for. I was stressed. Some officers were actually uncomfortable, he recalled. I sensed that something was definitely not right. His conclusion, after everything he experienced, was stark. It appears that MACC was used as a tool to intimidate, to pressure me to surrender. Basically, it is harassment. Another source, a business entrepreneur who described himself as having been specifically targeted in order to force him out of his own company, painted an even more detailed picture of what the interrogation experience was like from the inside. The moment you are in there, they put fear in you. They harass you, and they deprive you of access even to your lawyers. He described officers attempting to take statements in ways that distorted what he actually said. When I say A, they'll type B. He was pressured to sign documents at the end of exhausting, multi-hour sessions without being given adequate time to review what he was signing. I spent a whole day from morning until night. I was exhausted. I just wanted to get out of the place. The experience of being held in Malaysia custody has been described by multiple sources with striking consistency. The isolation, the deliberate creation of psychological pressure, the sense of being completely cut off from any external support or perspective. One source described it simply, quietly, as feeling cut off from the whole world. It was a lot of hurt, they said. Then there was a lot of stress, anger. For our reporting team, simply finding people willing to talk about these experiences was its own challenge. The fear was palpable. Multiple potential sources declined to speak with us. Others agreed to talk only under strict conditions of anonymity. The climate around the MACC, the awareness that this agency could, at any moment, turn its considerable institutional machinery toward any individual it chose, created a powerful chilling effect on anyone who might consider speaking out. There's an immense fear that the MACC can just one day turn up at your doorstep and just make your life a living hell, one person told us. The allegations about Section D and the corporate network were serious enough. But as our investigation deepened, we encountered a separate controversy surrounding Azam Baki directly, one that had already generated significant public debate inside Malaysia before our reporting began. A detailed two-part investigation published by a Malaysian media outlet revealed that Azam Baki appeared to have ownership of millions of shares in two publicly listed companies. Under Malaysian law, public officials are strictly limited in how much of any company's shares they can hold. The holdings attributed to Azam Baki reportedly far exceeded what the law permitted. The question wasn't just whether he had broken the rules. It was also a question of means. On a civil servant's salary, even at the most senior levels of public service, the acquisition of shareholdings of that scale raised serious questions about where the money had come from. The controversy generated widespread reaction. There were public demonstrations on the streets of Kuala Lumpur, with protesters calling for action against the MACC chief. Academics, legal professionals, and civil society groups demanded explanations. Azam Baki offered one. He claimed that the shares had been registered in his name by his brother, and that he had not personally directed or controlled those shareholdings. The explanation did not satisfy many who examined it carefully. One researcher who had previously served on an MACC advisory panel, someone who had spent their career studying the relationship between government and business in Malaysia, and who had genuinely believed in the agency's reform potential, was blunt in their assessment. This argument made by Azam Baki did not hold water, they told us. No formal action was taken against the MACC chief. But buried within the documentation that emerged from the shareholding investigation was another detail, one that, in the context of everything else we had uncovered, carried significant weight. Records showed instances of Andy Lim, the man described by multiple sources as being close to Azam Baki, and as being a key figure in the alleged corporate network, investing in certain companies around the same time that Azam Baki had investments in those same companies. The proximity of those investment decisions, considered alongside everything else, deepened the picture of an entanglement that went well beyond a casual friendship. And then there was the matter of the gun. One executive described being summoned to a meeting with Andy Lim. During that encounter, according to a formal police report that was subsequently filed, a firearm was visible, tucked into Lim's clothing. The executive said the display was deliberate, an act of intimidation, Andy Lim was arrested by police. His weapon was confiscated, and then, according to multiple sources with knowledge of what followed, Azam Baki allegedly contacted police and asked them to return the gun to Andy Lim. We put this allegation to the relevant parties. The responses we received will be addressed in a moment, but it is worth pausing here to reflect on what this, if true, would mean. The head of Malaysia's National Anti-Corruption Commission, allegedly intervening to recover a weapon for a man who had just been arrested by police and who was described by multiple sources as a central figure in an alleged network using Maxi's own machinery for corrupt purposes. Here is the question that sits at the center of this entire story, the one that no amount of investigative documentation can ultimately answer without political accountability at the highest level. Why is Azam Baki still in his position? This is not a rhetorical question. It is a practical, urgent, concrete question that speaks directly to the credibility of Malaysia's current government and its stated commitment to reform. Anwar Ibrahim came to power on the strength of a promise. Not just any promise, a promise that resonated so deeply with so many Malaysians that it helped propel him to the office he had sought for decades. The promise of genuine accountability, of breaking the cycle in which the powerful protected each other, while the institutions designed to hold them accountable were quietly hollowed out. The shareholding scandal broke into public view. The allegations about Section D and the corporate network were documented and reported. The concerns about Andy Lim's relationship with the chief commissioner circulated in both official and unofficial channels. Independent voices, academics, lawyers,